What's up, guys? Welcome back to my channel. I am here with another interview, and this interview is actually my last interview I'm doing in direct observance of Hispanic Heritage Month. However, I do plan to continue doing interviews even after this is over. It just won't be back to back to back like I've been doing lately. But I will continue interviewing other Latinos and also some non-Latinos as well as the months go on. So I have with me here Ramon. Ramon is Boricua. He is Puerto Rican, and he was born and raised on the island and is now living here in the U.S. So Ramon, welcome to my channel, and thanks for doing this interview with me.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, for sure. So Ramon, how did you find my channel, by the way?
I can't tell you exactly how I did find your channel. The best that I can remember, because it's been a few months. I think it was that I came across another YouTuber's channel that I have mentioned to you about that has interviewed you, and I think it was coming across that interview that I first heard of you, and then shortly, in a matter of days after that, I saw the interview. I came across the interview that you did with Phil of African diaspora, because I do kind of like check out what he does. I have been following him for the last few years, and also sometimes he does interviews from people from different nationalities, and it just so happens that after I saw that other interview, and then I saw the one that you did with Phil.
Okay, interesting. So I didn't realize that's how you had found my channel and stuff. Okay. So Ramon, where in Puerto Rico did you grow up?
I'm originally from San Juan. I was born and raised there. I've always been kind of like close to the coast, what is called the metropolitan area. It was kind of like where I was born, where I was lived the whole time. On occasion, I will travel the island because I will want to also see other parts of Puerto Rico, whether it was for leisure or because of my job. I will travel the island. So because it's very pretty, kind of like seeing the green areas, the countryside, and that sort of thing. But I always lived in the capital.
Okay, gotcha. I know there's a lot of Dominicans in Puerto Rico too. Is that one of the areas where there's a lot of them?
Yeah. I mean, growing up, yes, because I remember even when I was in elementary school, it wasn't an uncommon occurrence to have a classmate who was actually Dominican, and especially when I went to high school, there were a number of classmates that I had that were also Dominican, and now even in my old neighborhood. I mean, I remember going to my old neighborhood, visiting my mom, seeing all people that I knew when I was growing up. There is more of a presence, of a Dominican presence, that you can be driving around and you can drive past establishments and you can hear the bachata blasting all the way out to the street. So it has become fairly common. I mean,
Okay.
They've always been around. They have a strong presence in the capital. Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. Okay. So how would you describe growing up in Puerto Rico versus here? Or for someone that may not be very familiar with Puerto Rican culture, how would you describe it as far as, the people, the environment, like what's popular Puerto Rican type of music and food and all that? How would you describe that?
Well, I mean, for decades, if you're talking about music, for decades, it's been salsa. Salsa has always been popular for decades, since like the 60s. If it was popular in New York City, then it was popular on the island. Also, when I was growing up back in the 80s, there was a rise in popularity, a big rise in popularity of merengue, actually. Merengue was a big thing from the 80s to the 90s. Yeah, I'm old. The 80s to the 90s. Merengue was also a big thing. So there was the salsa, the merengue, the bachata. I first heard of bachata in the early 90s, but it didn't start to take off until the beginning of the 2000s. So
Okay.
today, a lot of people listen to bachata too. It's like some people, some of the older folks are still listening to the salsa. Like my dad, he's what we used to actually call. I know that you have a different meaning for this, but a popular term to use for somebody that listens to salsa all the time is a cocolo. But in the
Mm.
island, that's what that means. It's only recently
Oh.
that I have heard that cocolo has kind of like a racial connotation, or it can be used as some kind of a slur. You tell me. But in the island, when I was growing up, the term cocolo, that's kind of like another term for salsero. So
Oh,
that was a thing.
interesting.
Yeah. In the island, probably they don't use that term anymore. But that's something that I heard that term being used that way when I was a kid. hmm
Okay,
And
interesting. Yeah, it has a totally different meaning in DR. I mean, the term originally was used to describe English speaking Caribbean like workers that went to DR to work. They were called cocolos, but over time, yeah, now some people use it as kind of like a racial slur
mhm.
towards like black people. But okay, wow, that's interesting though that it has a totally different meaning
No,
in Puerto
in
Rico.
Puerto Rico, it had nothing to do with race. It had nothing to do with
Mhm.
that. hmm
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, when I think of Puerto Rican music, I mean definitely the first thing that comes to mind is salsa, but also reggaeton. Since Puerto Ricans were really the ones that made it like the huge thing that it is today, or that it kind of was. I mean, it still is. Did you ever get into reggaeton when you were younger?
Well, it was starting out. A lot of people think that reggaeton started like at the beginning of the 2000s, maybe at around the time when Daddy Yankee came out with the Barrio Fino album. That's
Yeah.
when it exploded in popularity.
Yeah.
But before he came out with that album, the popularity of reggaeton was well established on the island, all the way back to about 1992, something like that. I was still in school back then, but it wasn't called that. Back when I was starting, we were already listening to a lot of the Jamaican dancehall, the Jamaican dancehall music, dancehall reggae, and when it started out, we were listening to a lot of the rhythms, and one rhythm that stood out a lot was a Shabba Ranks song called Dembow. That's where the term Dembow comes from, because there is the Shabba Ranks song, dancehall reggae song in Patois, from Jamaica. That rhythm became the kind of like the foundation for what later will be known as reggaeton. For the first several years, for the first like 5 years or so on the island, what is now called reggaeton, it was only known as underground. It was called underground because it was literally an underground movement. It wasn't something that you were gonna hear on the radio. It was something that you may hear at a party. Somebody will have the tapes, and they will play, or they will have the records with the beats, and somebody will grab the mic and they will do what the Jamaicans call toasting, and they will do the raps over it in Spanish. And but that's kind of like the genesis of it. And not forgetting about the Panamanians, because I know that the Panamanians were doing a lot of what is called the DJ music. They will take a lot of the songs, the popular songs that were going on in Jamaica, and they were making like Spanish versions of the same songs, of the same reggae songs. And that's also that we will hear about, that we will know about, and they were popular, and that's where that started, but it was called underground because it was an underground movement. When it comes to the Panamanians, a lot of people don't know that there is a cultural connection between Panama and Jamaica. When
Yeah, there is.
the Panama Canal, there was a migration of Jamaicans to Panama to work there. That's why today you can find Panamanians, black Panamanians specifically, black Panamanians that might have an English last name. If you meet a Panamanian, a black Panamanian that has like an English name or at least an English last name, there is a good chance that they're either from the West Indies or from Jamaica. That's something that happened at about the time when they were building the canal. But going back to the underground movement, at first it wasn't called reggaeton. The underground wasn't called reggaeton until around 1997. I could be wrong, but it was in the late 90s. That's when the term reggaeton it became popularized. At about that time, the style had cleaned up a lot because at first it had to be underground. It could not be played on radio because it was very profane. The lyrics were like rather violent. It was remember that it was in the middle of the gangster rap era, so it was kind of like side by side with the popularity of what was called gangster rap at that time.
Yeah.
So it would seem like there was this glorification of violence, the glorification of smoking the herb, or the objectification of women. A lot of that was happening in the content of the music, and some of that material, because the DJs care about the recording process of the music, a lot of those masters were of pretty high quality, and they will actually manage to make CDs out of them, and they will try to kind of like sneak them into the local record stores until there was a crackdown in clear violation of freedom of speech. The crackdown, a lot of material, a lot of those records, a lot of those CDs, cassettes, ended up being confiscated. So they cleaned up their act. So the artists cleaned up the lyrics. They cleaned up a lot of the content that they were releasing, so they could release to the record stores. And from around 1994, 1996, if memory serves, that's when it started to get cleaner and more radio friendly. And at around 1997 or so, that's when the term reggaeton came to be. It's been called that ever since.
Okay. Yeah, so some of my audience may remember I did I don't know if you've seen my Music of the Americas series where I do like historical background on different genres of music, and I did one on reggaeton, and a lot of the things that you just said was things that I learned while researching the background of reggaeton, as far as, the migration of Jamaicans to Panama, and then Panama's creating reggae en español, and then from Puerto Ricans listening to that as far as in the dance hall, and then creating like you said, it was called underground, then later became reggaeton, and then later, it blew up here. So yeah, it's a pretty interesting kind of history when you actually look into it. Yeah.
It is. I mean, it's part of my youth because that's when I was coming of age. I was still in school at the time. So that era, those hold a special place for me. I'm not listening to it too much now because it's more commercial, and honestly, a lot of it kind of sounds the same. But not dissing it. I'm not dissing it at all. It's more commercialized, and it's doing well. I'm not going to speak against it. It's just it's not how it used to be.
Yeah, no, definitely. I know for me, well, I was at the end of high school when it was like really at its peak here, like 06, 07, 08, like it was huge here, and so I lived through that whole era, of like the golden era of reggaeton here. So as far as other aspects of Puerto Rican culture, apart from the music, what would you say are some of the best Puerto Rican styles of food that people should be aware of?
Well, my favorite thing to have my favorite thing to eat, that would be the mofongo. Particularly the kind of like the shrimp mofongo. It can be made with other things depending of the establishment. What can they offer? But my favorite would be kind of like the shrimp mofongo. We also have the rice and beans and other things made out of plantains and other the tostones, amarillo frito, other things made out of produce or yeah. I mean, it's not that great of a variety because it limits us to like chuleta frita, the fried pork chop, which I wasn't a fan of. But there is also the holiday foods, kind of like the arroz con gandule, or kind of like the potato salads, sometimes with the pieces of apples in it, and the pernil. The coquito, definitely. Coquito, that's more of a holiday drink.
Yeah.
And also the broiled pernil on the stick, a la vara, como le decimos. And that's also, there are certain places that we call the chinchorros. Chinchorros is kind of like an establishment where they're making food and people sit outside on chairs and hang out and eat well and drink and hang out. There are several places like that in different parts of the island. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that all sounds really good. And not too different from Dominican food. I mentioned the coquito because I don't know, my sister happened to meet this Puerto Rican guy that lives actually kind of near our area, and he makes coquito every year. So last year we ordered a bunch of, like, he does it in like mason jars of it, and we ordered a bunch of them. So good. I don't know if he'll do it this year because of everything going on, but if he does, I'm definitely going to get some of that. You know, to bring in the holidays.
There is also the kind of like the beach food that you get at the beach, kind of like the alcapurria, the bacalaito frito, kind of like the alcapurria. I know that the Dominicans have a different name for it, but it escapes me right now because you do the same thing, but you have a different name for it. What we call the alcapurria is kind of like a stuffed fried thing that is made out of like a corn flour and stuffed with either with some like chapin or made with stuff with shrimp. It's that kind of thing. And I know that the Dominicans have a name for it, but it's a different one. It escapes me right now.
Okay.
But
maybe
it'll come back. Yeah. But it's beach food in that you get at the kioscos, what we call the kioscos, or different establishments that are by the sea, or you can get a chillo, which is a type of fish that it can be grilled, and it's really good. You can get the whole thing.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, no, I definitely want to go to Puerto Rico someday. My dad used to go, back when he used to play baseball or softball when he was younger, he would actually go to Puerto Rico to play. So he's been there a bunch of times. But yeah, I definitely would like to go someday. I'm sure it's beautiful. So
it's very nice, especially like if you go there, you can take the scenic route from, if you are landing San Juan, there is something called the Ruta Panoramica, which is the scenic route. And it's kind of like a highway that goes around the whole island, and it gives you kind of like a route along the coast that you can see all of it. I mean, you can actually, one thing that you can do is that if you want to take the scenic route, you can leave early in the morning. You leave early in the morning, and let's say that you leave San Juan and you go towards the northeast along the coast. If you leave early enough, you should be able to go around the entire island in a day. You could do it in a whole day. So that's something that you can dedicate one day to doing that. Of course, there will be stops that you're going to have to make, and maybe you want to stop somewhere to get something to eat or that kind of thing. But let's say if you are just driving, you can go around the whole island in one day because the island is small.
Okay, I was going to ask you that because when you look on the map, when I look at Puerto Rico next to, DR, like it looks very small. So I take it doesn't take very long to get from one end or to get from the East Coast to the West Coast.
No, no. I mean, if you are in San Juan and you wanna go to like the west end of the island, it's about 2.5 hours.
Oh,
Two
wow,
and,
that's nothing.
yeah, 2.5 hours
Okay.
of driving to get to like Mayagüez or Aguadilla, which is Mayagüez is like the city on the west end of the island. Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like
Okay.
2.5 hours. I have made that trip several times. Hmm.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. So at what age did you move here to the States?
When I moved here to the mainland, I was already 32 years old.
Oh, okay.
And
Oh,
that
okay.
was, yeah, and that was back in 2008. So you can do the
Okay.
math, and you get how old I am. So I did move here first. First moved to Mississippi, of all places. A lot of
That's
people
very
that
interesting. And
yeah,
then
a
you
lot of
go to
people
Mississippi.
yeah, well, a lot of people, most people, when they move from the island, they either go to Florida or they go to
Yeah,
New York or they go
right.
somewhere in Massachusetts or Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
Those are kind of like a lot of Puerto Ricans move to. But no. When I moved out of the island, I lived in Mississippi, so it was a bit. I remember. It was a bit of a culture shock. I was taking up an opportunity because I had a friend living out there, and because of the economic situation of the island, and how it hit the recession. The recession that affected the United States. It affected it even worse the island. I mean, it's inevitable. Whenever there is a situation, an economic situation that affects the United States, Puerto Rico kind of gets a little bit worse.
Mm,
So,
wow.
and I was working there, and I loved being there, even with its with its imperfections, because it's not perfect. There are certain things that could be better on the island. I'm not gonna lie to you on that, but I loved it. I mean, I love the island, and I hung on as long as I could. I hung on as long as I could because I wanted to be there. But when things changed and it wasn't viable for me to remain on the island anymore for economic reasons, I migrated. I did, and I landed in Mississippi, and I actually was able to get back on my feet there. So even though with the bad the Mississippi gets, because I'm sure you have heard stories and how, it being backwards and things like that. You hear things like that. I'm not going to talk badly about Mississippi because I did have a chance to get back on my feet. Mhm. After that, I stayed there for a few years, and after that, an opportunity came up here in Texas. And that's where I am right now.
Mm-hmm.
So I've
Okay.
always been in the. Mhm.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I don't think you hear too much of Puerto Ricans being like in the deep South, like apart from Florida. Being in
Yeah.
states like Mississippi. When I think of Mississippi, I think of like racism. I don't know, like well, at least growing up here, like you always hear Mississippi being very associated with like very racist history. So
Yeah.
anyway, yeah, it's just interesting that you would go
No,
there.
it gets about rap, but I can tell you even though me being Hispanic, and by the time I moved there was kind of like a growing number of Hispanics that were arriving to the area, because if you remember, on 2005, Hurricane Katrina hit. It wasn't just New Orleans. It wasn't only Louisiana. It actually caused a lot of damage to the Mississippi coast. That brought an opportunity, and many people from other places and a lot of Hispanics that were into doing landscaping and doing construction and the like arrived there for the work. So little by little, the communities started to build. There was somebody, there was a Mexican man that I met there who had been already in the area before I got there, and he specifically told me that before Katrina, there were barely any Hispanics at all. He was one of the few, and that changed after Katrina because a lot of people got there. They started to show up there to work on the reconstruction of the coast, and also in New Orleans and kind of that area of Louisiana, because of obviously the more talked about part of the destruction of Katrina. That was more in the media, that was more talked about. There were Hispanics that also showed up there, kind of like with to help with the reconstruction efforts.
Okay, interesting. I didn't know that little bit of information. So now that you've lived in both Mississippi and Texas, what would you say were some of those culture shocks or some of the biggest differences that you noticed between living here in that region of the U.S. versus living in Puerto Rico?
There were three things. Oh boy, this is gonna get a tiny little bit political. When it comes to the racism, you will be surprised when I tell you that wasn't so much of an issue for me. Maybe because it was because of the perception. I mean, a lot of the people in that region will see me and they wouldn't know what to make of me. There are kind of like certain look or certain phenotype that somebody who is from Mexico, from Central America, is most likely to have. But many people in the area will see me, and I'm over 6 feet tall, and they wouldn't know what to make of me, and they will be a little cautious. They wouldn't make any assumptions or anything like that. So I can say, I'm not trying to make it sound like I'm so physically imposing, so nobody will mess with me. It wasn't like that. It's just that it was kind of like the locals, the people locally didn't necessarily know what to make of me because they had met people that either were Mexican or Central American, and they had more of a native heritage, and maybe they were not as tall, and they had a certain look, and they see me, and I was looking rather different, so I was left alone. It wasn't an issue. I was left alone actually, so I can't really complain on that. Now, three things that I had to learn right away. Laid back. One thing that we have is that we're fairly educated people. We are fairly smart. But one thing that we have in Puerto Rico is that we can be very laid back. We like to hang out. We love our days off, our holidays, and things like that. And the fact is that in Puerto Rico there is around a month worth of holidays, about 30 days. It's around 30 days. I don't know the exact number right now. Here in the South, when it comes to holidays, days off, and all of that, it's only like 9 days total for the whole year. So that was the first thing that I had to adjust myself to. I couldn't count on all of those holidays. To a degree, that was to me, even though one is used to having so many holidays and that, but that ended up being a bit of a blessing because I mean it kept me more productive. A lot of the time in Puerto Rico, you can have days off, but okay, you are off, but that's a day that you don't get paid for, and that kind of puts a hole in your pocket. I mean, what we call putting a hole in your pocket, meaning that you are not making as much. It makes it more difficult to make ends meet. So, in all honesty, as much as I love the island and all, like economically, the first thing that maybe we need to do is cut down on the holidays. Oh, I don't know how many people are going to have a problem with me saying this, but it's necessary. Economically, probably the island might do better if we cut down on the holidays, and we are
Yeah.
productive more days out of the year.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing that I had to uh, another thing that I had to get adjusted to is like kind of like with the promptness, being prompt and always being on time, and I
Oh,
got
yeah.
used to that. I mean, when I was working, all of that promptness was never really an issue for me, but I had to learn that it was more important out here. I had to
Yeah.
quickly learn that because it's because we're laid back people. A lot of the time
Yeah.
we're not on time. A lot of the time we're
Mm-hmm.
just not on time because of that, because we are more
Yeah.
laid back. It's
Mm-hmm.
just the fact. It's a fact.
Yeah.
That's something that I had to adjust to. Now, another thing that I had to that I had to get adjusted to was kind of like the obsession with money. A lot of people, I understood, and I had to really wrap my head around how some folks will have this obsession with money. They will be talking about it all the time, especially not so much out here in Mississippi. It was more of a thing. People were talking about money. They had this obsession with getting. They wanted to make money. That's something that I noticed that immediately, and that's something that I had to adjust to. And at least when I was over there, overall, the other thing that I had to get adjusted with, and this is more overall. This is not limited to Mississippi. This is not limited to the South. What's the issue of race? When it comes to race, that's something, because that's not something that we really culturally obsessed about. We are in Puerto Rico. There are going to be people that are going to say something else. They're going to try to say about things that have to do with racism and colorism. That's something that I had to learn about here, because the word colorism is not even used on the island. But when it comes to issues of race and inequities and and things like that, that's something that I really had to get into learning about it, because it's something that is such a predominant thing. It's something that so many people are talk about, like, constantly. It's like an obsession with race. I'm not going to specify one group over the other, but there was always that talk. They will
Mm-hmm.
talk a person. You could hear somebody talking about a person, a situation. At some point, somebody mentions something about race, ask about race or
Mm-hmm.
ethnic background, and things like that. And that was a completely new thing to me, because when I'm from, there are people that are of different races, but the whole thing, the importance of somebody's race, it wasn't really a thing. It's just not a thing. I mean, we're more concerned with things that have to do with culture, things that have to do with being around the people that we care about, our families, our friends, hanging out, having a good time. Those are the things that we're thinking about mostly. Issues of race, it just wasn't a thing. It wasn't a thing. That's something that it became a thing for me when I moved to the States, to be perfectly honest. Yeah,
Interesting. Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, that there seems to be a very interesting it's almost like two separate experiences that people have when it comes to, at
Hmm.
least back in Latin America, because I hear a lot of people that were born and raised in Latin America that say the same thing as you, that in their experience growing up, this whole big ordeal or obsession with race just wasn't a thing, that
Hmm.
everyone was kind of more concerned, or everyone, um their main source of identity is their nationhood, the nationality, and that's kind of how everyone binds together. But
Hmm.
then you have those that feel kind of the opposite. Well, they won't say that race is necessarily the same as it is here, but that's just that it racism exists in colorism, but just that it's different. So I don't know if you saw the interview I did with this girl Amelia. She's half Dominican, half Puerto Rican, but she mentioned that when she went to Puerto Rico, she noticed that
Yeah.
most of the people were very fair skinned.
Yeah.
And she was kind of like, where are the black people at? So do you feel like maybe the black Puerto Ricans might have a different experience, or did you know many?
Well, I'll make a clarification. When I mentioned about not knowing about colorism, I'm not saying that at no point in any time in Puerto Rican history there are never any issues that have to do with race, even if all of the people are Puerto Ricans and under the same culture and under the same banner and things like that. There must be a situation here and there where race may be a factor, but it's not something that is predominant. That is not. I think what there is this mass situation where like the police, they are specifically targeting people because they're black. And it's not really an issue of race necessarily. When there can be situations where something that has to do where race is a factor, is an element in the situation. It can happen. Yes. We just don't call it colorism. Is kind of like a prejudice, a perception that maybe somebody who is black, it might be perceived kind of like a more kind of poor, or that maybe from the projects, which that doesn't represent the majority. There are a number of people that do live in the projects, but many of them are white too. So that whole thing, it's not just black people who live in the projects. There are white Puerto Ricans that live in the projects too. Now, going back to the comment that the young lady that you introduced made, yes. When it comes to seeing Puerto Ricans that look white, yeah, they are. They are around there. They exist. My mom is one of them. She is like very white to the point that she has to be careful when she goes to the beach because she could burn really easily. And because of my dad, what does he look like? My dad will look more like a southern East Indian. And that's kind of like what they look at. That they are dark skin, but the hair is different. Now, his father, my grandfather, now he was black. He was black. He was a black man with the afro type of hair and all of that. But my dad was kind of like almost the same skin tone, but he looked more like an East Indian person, like a southern East Indian with the darker, because the skin was almost as dark as my grandfather's, who was like a
Mhm.
unmistakably. You couldn't confuse
Yeah.
them for something else. He wasn't passing of anything else.
Mhm.
My mom is white. My mom is like lily white, and because that's how my dad liked them. So that's how I came out. So that's how I came out this way. So they do exist. Now,
Mhm.
maybe that's more towards the middle of the island, the center of the island, up in the hills, in the countryside. But there are also many brown people. Now, if you are looking for people that could phenotypically would be more kind of like black, they will be unmistakably black, that they braid their hair and all of that, you have to travel around the coast. If you take that scenic route, and you take off from, let's say, San Juan, and you're traveling towards the northeast of the island, after you drive past, say, Rio Grande or Carolina, and you get to where Loiza is located, that's when you're going to start seeing more and more people that look like you and darker
Mhm.
skin,
Mhm.
and that are all the way black, unmistakably
Mhm.
black. They're not.
Yeah.
You're not gonna find that many light-skinned people in the area. I have been to the area, and it's kind of like you are surrounded. You're surrounded by black people, but they are also Puerto Rican. So, and
Yeah.
because they were my people, I was never feeling uncomfortable or anything. It wasn't an issue.
Okay. Yeah, I always hear Louisa mentioned as
Yeah.
like one of the most heavily concentrated area of where there's a lot of Black Puerto Ricans.
Yes.
Okay.
Hmm.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. Well, it seems like everybody kind of has a different perspective when it comes to the issue of race in Latin America. I'm just like,
Yeah.
at the end of the day, I feel like it is kind of relative. I mean, it's just kind of based on your own individual experience. I feel like you can't just kind of paint all of Latin America with one brush when it comes to the issue of race. And I
True.
feel like it varies a lot by the country. So it just
Mm-hmm.
depends. I mean, so I kind of tell people it depends. There's no
Mm-hmm.
one way to really describe it. So I know that you had been watching some of my live streams, and I think you had mentioned at one point you wanted to join, but I guess you never got the opportunity to.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, I know that in the last slide that you did, because of the subject matter, which was about Hispanic slash Latinos in the United States that were born and
yeah.
raised in the United States, that's kind of why I stayed out of it, because I mean, when I moved to the mainland, I was already an adult, so I feel like I wouldn't have the greatest perspective.
Every time though that we try to talk about, the group or Hispanics here in the US, it always goes back to Latin America though. Like it's just inevitable. I feel like our perspective histories in Latin America, it just somehow ties into, I guess, what we kind of experience here. So I mean, you would
Mhm.
have been okay because again, we always end up going back to the history of Latin America somehow. So
Yeah,
it is what.
but a common thing, something that I keep noticing during some of your life, that is that it always goes back to the Dominican Republic and the issue with the Haitians.
Yes,
I see that a lot.
always,
I see that
always.
a lot. There are people that I don't know. I don't know. It's like on your life there is always somebody that
Yeah,
they're talking about so-called Latinos, Hispanics, but there is always somebody that wants to bring it back to the issue of Dominican versus
yeah.
Haitian. It's like, oh, here we go again. Like
I know, I know.
it gets sidetracked and gets
Always,
off topic,
always.
and I can understand maybe you as a Dominican yourself, I understand. And
I was thinking
you,
maybe that's why. I don't know.
yeah, yeah, I'm sure that you are tired of that. And maybe
I
some of the.
I do get a little tired of it. Even I mentioned this the other day, but like even a few months back, I did a live stream dedicated to the whole thing that was going on with Black Lives Matter, blah blah blah, here in the US, and somehow it went back to DR and Haiti. I was like, come on, man. Like, how did we get here? But no, I
But
was saying I'm going to have to do a separate live just for that, so we can just get everything out there, and we can maybe just put it to rest or something.
I actually will be listening to that one. But I mean, the whole thing, the whole. I mean, I get it. And actually, listening to some of your lives, I have been able to get kind of like a better perspective on the issue, because back in Puerto Rico, I had friends that were Dominican. I would meet a Haitian here and there, and I will always hear about the situation with what happened with Rafael Trujillo. I
Yeah.
heard about that from the point
Mm,
of view of both Dominicans and Haitians, and the whole thing about the Parsley massacre. I heard about all of that, but
mm-hmm.
what I ended up learning watching your lives was kind of like the flip side of it, the things that did involve things that the Haitians did do also, and what happened after the revolution, and some of those things, and that has pointed me towards kind of like doing a little reading and trying to also learn a little bit about that. Yeah, because yeah, I mean, I'm an outsider on the issue. I know, but I'm from the Caribbean. I mean, I don't think it would be out of place for me to get some knowledge on that.
Yeah, of
So
course.
that's something that I'm trying to do. So I
Mm-hmm.
mean,
Yeah.
and yeah, because like I mentioned before, being in metropolitan San Juan, in the capital, eventually you're gonna come across somebody who who is Dominican. It's inevitable. So
Yeah.
yeah, eventually I was gonna hear about that. Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, no. Man, I mean, I had to start doing my research on it too because people would always kind of ask me questions, and I honestly wasn't that educated on the subject when I first started like my channel and venturing away from like makeup and doing these type of stuff, these type of videos.
Mhm.
I didn't know a lot, so I had to learn some of that myself. Yeah, but apart from that, though, what of the other topics that we spoke about kind of stood out to you?
One thing that when you do your life, something that surprised me about you is that you, maybe because you were born in the United States and you were actually kind of like looking into things that have to do with your culture, and you bring a perspective that kind of surprised me because there is always this talk about how Hispanics or Latinos that have some kind of African descent, that they don't want to acknowledge it. They don't want to acknowledge it. They don't want anything to do with it. And you embracing that is something that surprised me about you. And I was like, okay, this is different. Let me follow up
Really, it
and
was a
see
surprise to
how it
you?
is. Yes, yes, because that it's not a common thing to say. It's at least from what I have seen, is kind of like it's not common that you actually would be on a platform embracing that part of your heritage and actually talk about it, elaborate on it, and that kind of like, yeah, that kind of did surprise me because it's not a common thing to see. So yeah, you might
Mm.
be blazing a trail here.
Well, to be honest, I it just was never a big deal to me ever in life. Like, I mean, half of my family is dark, so the whole concept of blackness, even though my parents didn't really talk about race, but still, I was like, I see what my family looks like, and again, a
Hmm.
lot of them are dark. When I've been to the yard, a lot of what I see is dark people, not including Haitians. Before anybody says, "Oh, there's probably Haitians," no, I'm talking about actual Black Dominicans. Like, you're gonna see a lot of that. So to me, it was just never a big deal.
Yeah.
So, but when I started talking about, our heritage and stuff, and specifically our African heritage
Hmm.
on YouTube, that is when I saw, like, oh, wow, okay, people are not liking this. And, I did have Dominicans coming at me like, oh, you're trying to paint us as all black and blah, blah, blah. You Afrocentric. People were just angry. And I was like, yo, what is the problem? Like, because it's not like I'm out here saying, oh, all Dominicans are black. Because if anything, I've always said, no, Dominicans are not all black. And
Hmm.
the majority of us are mixed race people. We're mainly mulatto people. But yeah, people were not happy about it. And again, I was just like, why? It's such an obvious part of who we are. So why would I not talk
It
about
is
it?
an obvious part. It is an obvious part.
Mm-hmm.
It is an obvious part because I've had a chance to go to the Dominican Republic myself, and I have been able to see some of that myself. But maybe
Mm-hmm.
because I have kept to kind of like the more populated areas, kind of like the larger cities, and where there are more dense populations and things like that, then a lot of people that see, a lot of the people are like unmistakably, it's unmistakable that they are
Yeah.
of strong African descent.
Yeah.
And that's something that there is really nothing wrong with acknowledging that because okay, you want to deny it, you want to deny. Okay, what is that going to solve? What is that going to solve when
Exactly. Right.
then denying it? What's the gain in that? Denying that, what's the gain in that? What problem is that solving? It's not solving anything. Like, for instance, like with us Puerto Ricans, there are some of us that maybe they look very white passing, and there are many of us that are, and they might be very quick to kind of like not want to acknowledge the kind of like the African heritage and all of that. But it's in the culture. It is in the culture. Okay, a lot of us may look
Yeah.
white, and some may assume that because some of us are white, then that's what we like to think of ourselves, and some of us do like to think about ourselves, but that doesn't tell the whole story about us. It doesn't tell the whole story about us because if the if you go to the island, depending on where you are, like I was mentioning before, depending on where you are in the island, is this isn't because of segregation. That's just how where people are settled. You are gonna have people that have a different complexion, And the aforementioned Loiza, when you get to the town, there should be a sign that says something along the lines of Loiza being the cradle of Puerto Rican culture. This is the Black Town being the cradle of Puerto Rican culture. And who complains about that sign saying something like that? Nobody. Nobody. Nobody really complains about that because we understand that that is part also of who we are. Some people will insist on saying that they are mostly European, that they are mostly Taino, and things like that. But research has shown that the kind of like the when it comes to our blood, when it comes to our DNA, the African heritage is significant, and when it comes to the culture, it's even maybe even more significant because of the foods that we eat. The fact that in Puerto Rico we make barrel drums. It's kind of like the conga, but it's kind of like but it's bigger. And when we play bomba plena, that didn't come from Spain. That did not come from Spain. That's something that like the conga that was first invented. I understand it was in Cuba, but in Puerto Rico we have the barrel drum. That's something that they still make it to this day. That they take an old liquor barrel and they make a drum that is kind of like a conga, but it's like a wider diameter, and that's what they use to play the bomba plena, which is the real music of Puerto Rico. Some people will say that it's salsa. Well, salsa started in New York. So, what really started in Puerto Rico will be the bomba, plena, and as also Puerto Ricans had a lot to do with the development of salsa music. But that's something that it is part of the culture. That's something that is undeniable. That is something that is being kept. That tradition is being maintained, thankfully, which is something that I'm very grateful for. I wouldn't want that to die off because we might be trying to be more European passing, trying to be wider, and like, okay, who are we trying to impress? Who are we trying to impress? Because that is part of our culture, and that's something that should be maintained. I'm not trying to sound like some wannabe Afrocentric, but enough of us keep talking about the European heritage that we have and the native heritage that we have. And also talk about that, but might kind of like push out the African heritage. I wouldn't want that to be forgotten, and I wouldn't want that to not be preserved. It's part of us also.
Yeah, definitely. I did a video on bomba as well, and I remember when I was researching it, I did learn that was like the
Yeah.
first actual homegrown Puerto Rican style of music, and it's
Mm-hmm.
interesting because compared to DR, although I think on average you guys look whiter, generally
Yes.
speaking. I mean, in the
No, you
culture,
do.
you can definitely tell that African influence is there, like definitely. So yeah, it's a very interesting
Yeah,
combination.
but
Very good.
it's more on the cultural, but maybe not so much when it comes to the DNA heritage. Because my
Yeah.
understanding is that when it comes to the slave trade, uh, Puerto Rico, my understanding is that Puerto Rico didn't get that many slaves brought there. So there were also, it wasn't just there were a number of Italians that are also settled in Puerto Rico. Also,
Mhm.
that's something you
Yeah.
can find the Italian descendants in Cuba, to my understanding, because you do
Mhm.
find people in Puerto Rico that have Italian names. I mean,
Okay.
yeah, you find that too. There was a long time mayor in San Juan. His last name was Santini, and you find there were kind of like physicians and people like that will have names like uh, Giovanetti or Silvagnoli and Banucci. They will have names like that. That's something that it was the norm to see, because there were people that will have also that heritage. It wasn't only the Spaniards that settled in Puerto Rico. Hmm.
Yeah. Well, DR actually also had a somewhat similar history in that, well, compared to like say Haiti, DR Santo Domingo, they didn't bring in a very, very heavy amount of enslaved
Hmm.
Africans either. But
Hmm.
because the colony was a lot poorer and stuff, it led to like a lot of race mixing. And but I
Hmm.
think
Hmm.
one of the differences, at least in comparison to Puerto Rico, was that Puerto Rico, from what I remember learning, received a large influx of European immigrants in the 19th century. Whereas in DR, a lot of the Europeans
Yeah,
fled, especially like
yeah.
after the Haitians took over the whole island. So anyway, just little things that led to the different, ethnic makeup that we see today. So coming back to the States now, who do
Yeah.
you kind of hang out with more? Do you to associate more with other Hispanics, or do you have like, white or black American friends? Like what's kind of like your social circles these days?
Actually, I'm not even. These days, I'm a little bit more of an introvert. It was actually in Mississippi when I used to hang out a lot, when I used to party a lot more.
Okay.
Out here, I'm focusing on work, and especially lately because of the pandemic, it has put limitations on one hanging out, going out, and things like that. So I haven't been doing that so much. I have been focusing on what I have to do. I
Okay.
mean, kind of like focusing on work and things like that. So I'm not hanging out that much anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, when I was in in Mississippi, I will be hanging out more with fellow Hispanics. I will be whether it's Central America or from Mexico, or maybe with a Colombian here and there, or somebody from Panama. There are a couple of people that are there right now that are still staying in touch with. But out here, when I'm located, there are barely any Puerto Ricans. I mean, if I want to find Puerto Ricans, I will have to travel to another city. I don't want to get
Yeah.
into specifics as to where I am located,
Mm-hmm.
but most of the people that I encounter are like Mexican Americans and
Yeah.
maybe Central Americans, and but people kind of keep to themselves, kind of keep a lot to themselves out
Mm-hmm.
here. So I kind of have gotten into doing the same thing. One thing that I don't maybe go out to a club like that anymore is because of closing times. Because at least when I was when I was in Mississippi, you could be at a club and the club will stay open at about four in the morning or something like that. But out here, by 2 in the morning, you have to go. And
Mm-hmm.
it's like, it's not worth it. It's not worth it because it doesn't get good at the club out here until midnight. It's boring at a
Yeah.
club here until midnight. But then at two
Yeah.
in the
Same in
in the
DC.
morning, you have to go. Maybe you don't have to go home, but you have to go. And I
Yeah.
was like, nah, why dress up and all of that only so you can be for like a couple of
Yeah.
short hours at that club? This
Mhm.
isn't worth it. And also, it's not like it used to be. I mean,
Yeah.
lately, if I go to that club, I feel a little out of place. Like I'm okay. I'm too old for this.
Yeah, no, I'm
Huh?
only 32, and when I go to the
Oh,
club
you're still
now,
a kid.
I'm sleepy by like 12:30. It's bad. It's so bad. I used to be able to, like literally dance the whole night till 3 or 4 in the morning, but now I'm tired. I'm sleepy. Like it's bad. It's really bad.
No,
Yeah.
no, but I mean, I could still go out, hang out, party until I was 38, 39 years old. After
Mhm.
that, kind of like calm down on that whole thing.
Yeah.
But
Hmm.
it's just one ages and one has different priorities.
Right.
And I make different plans instead of wanting to hang out and partying out here. I kind of like save my PTO time and I save money and I go somewhere, get on a plane and go somewhere. That's what I would rather do. I mean, it's kind of like
That's
when I
cool.
what I started doing. Like for example, like I remember the first time when I went to Santo Domingo. I've never been there, and a friend that I had back in Mississippi, she was going to be going to Santo Domingo to see her family. And I mentioned to her, well, I have never been down there, and she told me like, well, when I go, make plans, and you go too, and meet us there, meet me there, and hang out with us, and all that. I have to admit, going down there, it was a different experience because we're Puerto Ricans can party, hang out, have a good time, but the Dominicans, oh boy, that was on another level. I remember partying for
Yeah.
like 5 nights straight, barely
Oh my
sleeping. I
goodness.
remember I was so exhausted. I was worn out. It took me like a week to recover after
Oh
I got
my
back to Mississippi. But yeah, but it's a good memory. It's a good
goodness.
memory. Had a great time. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, that's
After
good.
that, I didn't need to party much anymore. I was all partied out. Yeah,
Oh, I
yeah.
believe
You
you.
can
I
do it.
believe you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you sure can do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thing about Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is a colony. This is the harsh truth about Puerto Rico. A lot of people don't know that there are other Puerto Ricans that are not going to tell you the truth about the political status of the island, and they mention they immediately when they mention something about the island status of the island, they start talking about we're American citizens, and that's true. But when it comes to the island itself, it's not a commonwealth. It is not a commonwealth. It's not an incorporated state or whatever convoluted term they want to have for the island.
Okay.
In the 1950s, something was signed that it would make the island officially, on paper, a commonwealth. But it was never like that because a commonwealth would be Canada. That would be a real commonwealth. Puerto Rico was a colony. It always back. It always was all the way from the 50s until today. Well, actually, Puerto Rico it's been a colony, somebody's colony since 1493. That never changed. Colonial
That's
status
crazy.
never changed. It's been like that since 1493. Fact.
Wow.
That's not debatable. That's not disputable. That's the fact. And there might be people that will want to argue against that. No, 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 no. Don't argue against that because it is not debatable. You can argue against something that can be debatable, that can be proven otherwise as it being a different situation. Unfortunately, when it comes to Puerto Rico, that cannot be debated. It's been a colony all this time, and that might be part of the issue. Why there is always this confusion about self-determination or trying to
Mhm.
decide what to do, what can happen with the island when it comes to the local politics, because you got
Mhm.
one political party that wants things to remain the way they are. There is the other party that wants statehood for the island. That might sound great and all,
Mhm.
but plebiscites and referendums have been done on that question when it comes to that issue, but it always ends in nothing because it's something that Congress, the United States Congress, will have to pass into law. That's something that has been brought up to Congress, has been brought to the U.S. government, but it always ends up in nothing. But there is the political party, the so-called progressive party. Those are the ones that are wannabe Republicans. They're the ones that are always kissing up to whoever leads the Republican Party. So in this instance, right now, it will be number 45. I'm just gonna say number 45. You know who I mean, and that's not gonna be. It's not gonna be resolved because the so-called progressive party, instead of putting the priority in working towards the betterment of the island, they're always talking about the status issue, pro-statehood. They're always keeping that. They always stay talking about that. And they have been doing that since the late 1960s. I mean, over 50 years. And it always ends in absolutely nothing. And the other party, the so-called Democratic Party, that's the one that wants things to remain the way they are. But now that there is an election coming up, this young lady. Her name is Alexandra Lugaro. She's the independent independent candidate. I will give it a chance. I can't vote for her because I don't live in the island, but she's somebody that I will give her a chance because she makes sense. She does make sense to what she's saying. There are too many people that are her supporters. She needs all the support that she could get without getting too much into it. But there are like too many of the people of the island, because they vote out of tradition. They're always talking about estadidad, or ELA, Estado Libre Asociado, which is the status that the island right now still has, and it has since the 50s. And it's been between these two, the two main parties. Hopefully, there is a chance that can be given to somebody who might do some good. That could do some good. Yeah. So that will be my hope for the island, because I still care about the island. I take it with me. That's what I was born and raised. So I take that with me. So I will want what's for the welfare of the island. Yeah.
Right. Gotcha. Bueno, everyone, I'm going to conclude the interview here. So, Ramon, thank you again for doing this interview and for giving us your perspective on Puerto Rico and, going to DR, your experience here in the country. For everyone in the comment section, if you have any questions for Ramon, definitely leave them in the comment section below. I usually mention this at the beginning of the video, but Ramon is not a YouTuber, so I don't have a channel to point you guys to.
No. I mean, I'm not a YouTuber, but I'm gonna be checking out the comment sections, and everybody is welcome to ask a question, but kind of like don't use the comment section as a way to toss any hate or start saying that you don't know what you're talking about. I am from the island. Mostly I do know what I'm talking about. It's just that maybe my experience may not have been exactly the same as another person who is from the island. Maybe they come from a different situation, but I am an islander. I said everywhere I go, there are people that I have been asked actually if I'm from New York. The thing is that I have never been up there. Never been there. I would like to visit. I would like to eventually to visit New York City, because my grandma and my mom used to live there at one time. For a number of years, my grandma and mom, they did live in New York City, but I have never been there myself. And I could easily have been a New Yorker myself if grandma had not made the faithful decision of going back to the island. Because a lot of people move out of Puerto Rico and then they never go back. They never move back to the island. But grandma missed the island so much that eventually, when she was older, she did went on and moved back. And that is about the only reason why I am an islander right now, and why I have this different experience. It was that faithful decision. Yeah.
Okay.
So definitely, I'm looking forward to seeing more of your lives, and any questions that the audience will have for me. Definitely, I'm gonna be looking into that, and I'm gonna give you the best answer that I can give you, the best opinion that I can give you.
All right, y'all. Well, that is it for this video. Again, thank you, Ramon. Thanks to everyone that has watched this interview, and I'll check you guys in my next video.